Hey, it's Alan, and I just wanted to let you know that you can now listen to the ongoing history of new music early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
Once upon a time, the Headstones were the scariest band in Canadian music. They scared audiences, they scared record companies. Hell, they even scared themselves. There were other words to describe them. Intense, self-destructive, high energy. But I think the word the group liked the most was furious. Here's singer Hugh Dillon.
And our band's so unique, and it's so unpredictable and so ferocious. You get a high from playing in it, because when it's on, it's like totally. I grew up playing hockey. This is like a hockey team. When it's on, it's like that. It's Doug Gilmore and I lived on the same street. We play one-on-one on the swamp at the end of our street every night. And I played hockey with, our manager, Bernie, was the goalie. Paul Langlois was the right winger. I was always the defenseman. The cops were our coaches who'd leave their guns in the dressing room in the mornings at the Harold Harvey rink in Kingston. And this band has that thing that is just, when it's on, the guns are blazing. And what really, to me, is fascinating is really how great they are as musicians, like their songwriting capability.
Yeah, well, that doesn't even begin to tell the story of the Headstones. Strap in. This is a good one. It's the Headstones, in their own words, Part 1.
This is the Ongoing History of New Music podcast with Alan Cross.
The Headstones from their 2019 album People Skills, and that's called Leave It All Behind. Welcome again, I'm Alan Cross, and this is another edition of an In Their Own Words program. This is where I get a band into the studio and have them tell their own story unvarnished and unfiltered. And I finally managed to round up Hugh Dillon, Trent Carr, and Tim White for some time in the studio. And boy, did they have some stories to tell. The only place to start is at the beginning. So here we go.
Let's start from the very beginning. So how the Headstones come out of Kingston? What year are we talking about?
89.
No, you came from Kingston earlier than that. It was like 80s.
Well, I can go back. I mean, I chronologically, here's exactly what happened. I remember being 18 and I grew up in Kingston with David Usher and the guys in the Hip. We all went to the same high school, and I struggled with reading and writing and math, and was drawn to rock and roll music. And I was a latchkey kid, so I just loved TV and movies and rock and roll music. I was a huge Bob Dylan fan because my brothers and sisters were 15 years older, so I inherited their take on it, and I got involved with I was involved with drugs, and then I got involved in selling drugs and all of those things. And at an early age I was lucky, because even the guys in the Hip were always very kind, and I remember being selling LSD to Gord Downey, and I was Gord Downey's light guy at the first high school dance where his band called the Slinks performed, and I was going, this is great, I'm the light guy, Gordy's great. And then he packed it in with that band, and I joined as the singer, and that lasted a little while. And then I, after just out of high school, I was going to Queen's University, but I couldn't handle a day job because I hated working for people, and I didn't have the social skills to deal with other people's bullshit. And I was selling drugs, all sorts of different things, and cocaine, and I loved Teenage Head. And I'd go to a place called The Manor, and me and Gord Downey would go to places downtown in Kingston and watch old blues acts, like Luther Guitar Johnson would play at the Prince George, and Gord and I would go and wait for him backstage and talk to him, and he'd always ask us if we had weed, and we always did. So he would take us to the girls' bathroom where his 300-pound drummer Ola May that was her dressing room, so she could lock the door and we could smoke pot. And so it's me, Gord, and this great old bluesman. And then on the other days, I'd go to a place called The Manor, which was like hosers and tough and just a brutal place. But Teenage Head would play, and I was in heaven because I thought whatever this kind of music is magic. And Frankie came out one day and, was looking for blow, and yeah, this is the guy from and I was 18. And then my drug career blew up in my face. And my mom had me sign a thing that said, first of all, they said...
Wait, when you mean your drug career blew up in your face, what
I was
exactly
going
happened?
to Ottawa, and I was scoring for an 18-year-old kid. I was scoring 10 pounds of dope at a time and bringing it back to Kingston, selling it to people at university and other places. And I was in deep with a lot of people who, I was from a prison town. This is the way I was going to go. Some people, that was the way it was looking for me. But I had these aspirations. I loved rock and roll. I didn't know how I'd get there, and I loved movies. And just hustling, it's a hustle, and Frankie was awesome. And I loved this band. They were magic. That was a peak. And later on, that was something Trent and I bonded about, was that band. And to this day. And and then it blew up in my face, and I'd gotten in trouble. I was in trouble with the law and in trouble with some other nefarious figures, and guns were involved, and I got the shit kicked out of me, and I had the opportunity then to retaliate, and I saw the image of the penitentiary that I'd grown up with, and I know that if I retaliate now, I'm going to go to prison for life. And so it was like, I had to take the punches, and all of a sudden I'm on a plane. My folks said, listen, you can go anywhere else in the world you want to go. We'll buy you a ticket, but you can't stay here. And you got to sign a little thing for my mom, and they're in tears, and that says, you can't come back to Kingston for, a couple of years. And so I got on a plane, and I went to England. Never been on a plane in my life, never been on a subway. As far as ever I got out of Ontario was Montreal. And so I was 19, boom, on a plane to England, and because I loved the Stones, I loved the Beatles, I loved the Pistols, I loved the Clash. So I was like, London, I didn't know where. And I met some great guys there, and I busked, and I had a squat, and I drank with Lemmy from Motorhead, and I was like, I'm starting. And my only caveat to myself and everybody else is that I am going to not pursue a life of crime that I had a natural kind of ability for. And so, it translated beautifully into show business.
Well, I was about to say that with that kind of backstory, the Headstones as a whole make a whole lot more sense to me now.
Hell yeah. And that's where, these guys came up. The band is kind of so ancient. So I came back home, never lived in Toronto, and that was the thing. I still couldn't go back to Kingston. And all of these guys, the hip were I had a place down on Sherbourne over here. So the hip were starting to come to play in Toronto. And they were playing up at the Isabella up on Sherbourne. And they had a sax player, Paul Langlois, who I grew up playing ice hockey with from the time we were 8.
Dave Manning was the sax player.
Right. Good mind. So those guys were playing, and they would come to Toronto, play at the Isabella. And so it's really a lot to do with the hip, how we got here. So I was like, and I'd learned to write songs and play on the street in England, and I was playing covers and stuff. So I had no compunction in terms of playing my own music. And Gordy and I had always had a mutual respect, because in high school it was Dylan Downey, so we were in a lot of the same classes and the same dramatic arts class because our names started with D. And he was really a sweetheart. And so, and he also always found it funny that, because we'd say, so what'd you do all weekend? He goes, I rehearsed with the band. What'd you do? And I said, I scored a couple of keys in Montreal. and then, Mr. Dillon, Mr. Downey, can you stop talking? And that was like grade 12. Those guys didn't have anywhere to stay, so I had my little apartment. So during the day before the show, they come down, we smoke pot, and we hang out. And then that night they're playing, and we go, and they've got a sax player. And I was like, these guys are great. And then, they made their way, and I was starting, and there was some other guys, and you can take over soon. There were a whole bunch of other guys in Kingston from Kingston who had moved to Toronto. Andrew Frontini, who was in Gord's first band, the Slinks, who I had done lights for, Randy Kwan, who wrote Cemetery with me back in the day, who was in my typing class. Grant Etche, who was in 13 Engines. He was in Gord Downey's first band, the Slinks. A bunch of other bands.
Oh, the guy from Copyright?
Pete Bourne, who was also in, what's the band that, Green something that used to play down at the Cameron?
He's Ann Bourne's brother, right?
Yes.
Oh, right.
So all of there was like painters, people from our art class, because we all took art in high school. I had a great dramatic arts teacher. We had great art teachers, and so long story short, it were all these guys, and we started a band called Sean Penitentiary. So it was Randy driving it, and we're drinking a lot and having a lot of fun. It was still, we were 24, 25, and Mark Gibson and Andrew Frontini. And so Trent had seen the band play.
Well, I was friends with Mark, and I was going to art school at the time. I would a slightly different background than you.
I think most of us do.
Yeah. Where I was just like up in my room playing guitar and going to art school. And then I was friends with Mark, and we started jamming with Randy at this house on Carlton.
Oh, right, yes.
Above like a glue, like
the abortion
bunch of glue heads. Abortion clinic.
Yeah.
Bunch of squatters in the basement doing glue, and we were up in the attic jamming. And one day Hugh walks in, and Randy's like, I know this guy who can sing some songs. So Mark and Randy and I were jamming, and Hugh came in, and it was just like, that was cool. Like one of those electric moments, where it all came together and felt really good, like a real band all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. Then these guys, the Sean Penitentiary thing continued, and all of a sudden I was in there being the guitar player. I quit art school.
And then, Trent, people don't know it was originally American. It's like when we first started doing... we're born originally. But we started, so it was that core Kingston thing, and then Trent started playing with us, and it just changed everything, because I started writing the first songs with Trent, because he had these riffs, and I think because he was an artist, it wasn't stereotypical dumb guitar rock. There was something in it that I recognized that I was able, and Tim was the same. You went to Berkeley, right?
Yeah, eventually. Yeah,
Berkeley in Boston?
Yeah, to study bass.
Yeah.
And they had grown up together.
Right. And I love telling the story, because the only reason I'm a bass player is because I've known Trent since I was really young. And one day he and his brother were going to Steve. We're going to Steve's Music to get guitars. And I went along, and I saw the guitars, and I should get a guitar too. And Trent said, no, you should get a bass.
There's too many guitar players.
Yeah. I'm like, okay. And so, And so I did. And then because I grew up in Scarborough, which was a cultural wasteland, and I didn't really have any friends beyond Trent, so I would go downtown and stay at his house for the weekend. And that would be sort of my musical rock and roll education, because we'd sit in his room, he'd play me like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and The Who and all these bands, and then I'd go home and play bass all week by myself, and then come back and show.
And all of a sudden he was good.
Suddenly, yeah.
But they're great musicians, and so just to your point earlier, that is the backstory. I tried to be as concise as I could. You can cut it up and edit it however you want, but that is it.
Let's stop here for a sec and play something from that first Headstones album, which was released in July of 1993. This is Cemetery.
Went down to the cemetery looking for love. Got there and my baby was buried. I had to dig her up. Yeah. Went down to the cemetery looking for love.
The Headstones with Cemetery from the 1993 debut album Picture of Health. We'll come back to that record in a second as we continue with part one of the Headstones in their own words. This is part one of the program where I got the Headstones to tell their own story. Let's continue with some tales from the early days.
Yeah, like the first Sean Penitentiary gig was like 86, I think, at Ildico's on...
Oh, I forgot about that!
on Bloor Street.
Yeah.
And,
wow!
Because I remember I was jealous because I didn't play it.
That's good. And then you used to come and see us at the Silver Dollar.
Yeah. And then
that's
I played
Heart of the first time I played Heart of Darkness.
Yeah,
and
I was like, hey,
song.
that song's cool.
Yeah.
And in '88, I think I first started playing with you and Randy and Mark.
And was it?
Yeah.
Was it still called Sean Penitentiary at that point, or was it?
Yeah. And then we played the Quoc-Tay, which was violent.
So you guys play around for 4 or 5 years, and then you end up with the Picture of Health album, which was a huge hit out of the gate.
Yeah.
Who discovered you? Who signed you?
Cam Carpenter.
I think at first, remember it was Tony Wanamaker. He worked for Much Music.
Yeah.
And he had our demo tape for some reason. I can't remember how. And he gave it to Yvonne Matsell, who ran the X-Ray and Ultrasound Club. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And then she booked us there. And then she invited like Cam Carpenter and Joe Bamford. And
we had that big party and all the managers and agents and people showed up. And it's like, let's let them see us before the midnight hour when they see the drunk and crazy go yourself side. There are two sides of the band.
So this is 92, 93. So we're at the beginning of this Canadian rock renaissance or this can rock revolution.
Yeah.
And you guys, along with the Hip and Our Lady Peace and I Mother Earth and Moist and Sloan, you were all coming out at exactly the same time. And up until that point, there was generally across the country this feeling that Canadian music was substandard.
Yes.
But starting in the early 90s, you guys
to correct you, and I don't want to correct you, but to correct you, that feeling, first of all, it isn't a correction. First of all, you are right. But I think what we had was, I knew that Teenage Head wasn't substandard. It just wasn't recognized worldwide.
Right.
So there was something in there that even had my back up about people thinking Canadian music was substandard. I've always had a problem with that.
But this all changed. And not only did people begin to support Canadian music in untold numbers, but they began to demand it. And then they began to recognize, hey, Teenage Head. Hey, Rush. Hey, Triumph, April Wine, Neil Young, Bachman Turner Overdrive, Guess Who?
BTO are great.
All those bands. And then there's this rush to sign Canadian bands in the early 90s.
I remember that.
Especially after the Nirvana thing happened with Sub Pop.
Yeah, I remember Sub Pop came up to Toronto to watch us. Watch us play.
And said no.
Well, we said no.
I'm trying to think of others. Sons of Freedom, Gob.
Sons of Freedom.
Terrific bands. And then all through the 90s, you have this can rock thing happening where it's where we become proud and fiercely nationalistic and fiercely protective.
And I think the Hip were the big thing there. The Hip unified everything, and I think that's what propelled it forward.
I think so too.
And then we were lucky that the dovetail of the. When Nirvana broke, and for us, we were lucky that we had enough of that raw angst, and we were, some of us were alcoholics. And,
not saying who.
Yeah, but we had enough of that there was an appeal for us.
It was punk.
Yeah, but we were lucky again with the Hip thing, because I remember when MCA and Cam Carpenter, signed us at Ultrasound, they were like, they're a little dangerous, but the backing of Gord Downey and Paul Langlois, who were with MC at the time, showing up at our
Gasworks show.
At our Gasworks show, and also the Ultrasound show, the showcase, remember? Mm-hmm. And it was having the two guys in the Hip as fully completely was a blockbuster, showing up at a Headstones show and saying, we know Hugh. He grew up with us from Kingston. This was a great band, and we're here on a Tuesday night. That had just as much to do with us getting signed as our, incredible talent.
What can you tell me about that first album? Again, platinum out of the gate. Was that a surprise to you, or did you...
Oh, very much so a surprise, yeah. But we were totally green. We had no idea what we were doing in the studio. I remember feeling completely, overwhelmed in a way and not knowing what we were doing. But we had the songs that were just the songs that we had. It's that typical sort of first album kind of cliche. You have your whole life to write your first record, and then you got to write your second record in 6 months. So we had these old songs that were just sitting around, and we had developed. And
about Cemetery, Tweeter and the Monkey Man.
Yeah. Something Stands for Nothing. And
I always looked at it. All of those songs. But I always looked at it, and I still do, and that's why I think the new records are so much better. It comes down to the live style of songwriting. We wrote these songs because we were going to play at Lee's and we were going to play live. So the songs had, in my mind, had to stand up live. People had to be able to, you could tell if they uncrossed their arms, they liked the song. And then we would work on them, and we knew these were great songs. And then people started coming to see us at the little bars around Toronto, Sneaky D's or the Blue Moon Saloon or Lee's. And we're playing Cemetery. We're playing where we've got the stage act, and really it's just plug in and play as hard as you can. And so I knew we had the songs. The studio was a different thing, and we were suddenly trusting all these people who, to this day, I question some of the choices. And it was, because we're starting to listen to the manager. The managers are basically, at that time, people going, listen, trust me, we know what we're doing. And I was always hesitant. And then they get a producer who so you're paying this guy all this money and then right to videos, really? And nothing was ever really gelling for me. And that's why now, when we make the records, we control everything. And these records, to me, are the band.
The Headstones with Tweeter and the Monkey Man, another single from that first album, that platinum debut, called Picture of Health. Let's continue.
Let's go back to the second album. So, Picture of Health was a big success. Then you come back with Teeth and Tissue.
Yeah.
And this is where things begin to get a little weird, maybe?
Just exhausting. I know we'd been on the road so much for that record, Picture of Health.
Yeah, we were doing,
and then after it.
How many days?
I was going to say we were doing like 120 shows a year or something like that during the whole
I think we did
90s.
160 the first year.
How many shows a week is that?
That's like one every 3 days.
Yeah, that was incredible.
Yeah.
But that's why we've got great hardcore fans now. They remember us, and we played hard.
I think a lot of bands suffer from that. You have this album, it's a success. You go out and you tour and you tour and you tour, and all of a sudden the record company says, "Well, we need that second album in 6 months," and then you write it furiously while you're on the road, and then you go into the studio with songs that maybe aren't completely fully formed.
Well, it's that whole second album syndrome, right?
Right. So that was just the same thing that happened to us. But what we learned out of that was that we do have some good songs here, but if we just had a little bit more time and a little bit more, just breathing room.
Headstones from their second album, Teeth and Tissue, which appeared in March of 1995. In a moment, we'll go deeper into, when things began to get scary and weird and dark. This is part one of the Headstones, in their own words, and we've reached the point where the band is up to their third album, Smile and Wave, from 1996.
Okay, so we come to Smile and Wave. I got in big trouble for Smile and Wave.
How so?
I played an unedited version of Cubically Contained on the radio.
Oh, yes, there was a profanity in that.
Yes, and a very, very clear profanity.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And this was about 5:30 in the afternoon.
Oh, I feel for you.
Yeah, it was. And I was the program director at the time. So I thought I was being a real rebel, but then there's something called the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council. And, of course, a bunch of people were listening, very concerned, what about the children?
Yes.
So,
Letter writers.
Yeah.
F the children.
Well,
Yeah.
that's, I have to say that Smile and Wave is probably my favorite Headstones record.
Yes.
Despite the fact that you almost got me fired.
Oh, yes.
Well, I almost got me fired because of you.
I'll never promise. Never promise. Never promise. Anything again. Anything again. Never promise. Never promise.
You get lucky sometimes, and you only get lucky by continuing to do it over and over again. And we loved that record, and then you have some misses, but then you have things like that where you can listen to tracks that are just timeless.
There's a bunch of stuff in your catalog that is timeless. Cemetery would be one. Smile and Wave would be another. I'll go with Cubically Contained again. These songs could be released today.
You still like singing. That's how we can tell what still is in the set list, because none of us can go up and play something we can't get behind, because the crowd will see it. One of us will know that the other one doesn't want to play it.
And you're just phoning it in.
Yeah, and we can't do that. And that's what forces these new records, because we need to make it count for us.
I smile and wave. I smile and wave. I smile and wave.
Smile and Wave, the title track and a big single from the third Headstones album. Here's more from Hugh Dillon.
And so it's always just keeping your eye open. So even in the cloud of drugs and alcohol, I always had that muscle memory of I love rock and roll music, and I love these guys play so beautifully because they're not trying to write hits. They are writing musical pieces that are in their subconscious, and that's what I'll latch on to, because they don't come up and, hey, here's a finished thing. It's usually when we're playing something else in the live situation, and I'll hear them subconsciously noodle. And that's when I stop everybody and, what's that? And I isolate notes, like do whatever he did that. I go, that is, I haven't heard that before. And I am of the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours, because I grew up just obsessively listening to records. I was a record collector, and I had crates of them. And like I said, growing up, I thought Bob Dylan was a relative because he had the same last name. My brother was obsessed with him. My brother's name is Jude, and we were like Catholic family, but my brothers and sisters had this undercurrent of, really, all that matters is rock and roll. And so I know guitar licks, I know lyrics, I know it crazily. And to hear these guys play, or Trent, it's shocking, because Trent and I, last week in Ottawa, we were doing some press, and it was like, he'll play something. I go, that's really amazing. It's funny because I have no respect for you as my friend. but you do this magic trick that all of a sudden, whoever that guy I have all the respect for.
Yeah, the magic trick.
And it's the same with all of us. It's like we have just no respect for each other.
Zero.
It's just a joke.
No, none.
But when you do the one thing you're great at, it's always shocking.
Yeah,
and you
we go,
think, that
wow,
guy
How
is...
does that happen?
That guy he is incredible. He's an incredible human being. When you see them do the one thing they're great at.
And then it's gone.
Yeah.
Without a sound, without a sound, without a sound. Without a sound, without a sound, without a sound.
More from Smile and Wave from 1996. That's Without a Sound. The Headstones managed to get through 3 albums without anybody dying or getting killed. But the longer things went, the darker everything got. And frankly, it's amazing that the band is still here to tell these stories. We'll go through everything, and I mean everything, about that darkness and the subsequent redemption of the Headstones on part 2 next time. Meanwhile, you can get podcasts of this and hundreds of other ongoing history shows by going to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and basically every other podcast platform in the known universe. Subscribe and get everything for free. I have a website, ajournalofmusicalthings.com. It's updated every day and comes with a free daily newsletter so you never miss anything. You should subscribe to that too. You can always find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and email sent to alan@alancross.ca will be answered. See you next time for part 2 of the Headstone story. Help from Adam when it came to recording the interview, and technical production is by Rob Johnston. I'm Alan Cross.
You've been listening to the Ongoing History of New Music podcast with Alan Cross. Subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and everywhere you find your favorite podcasts.